Now, what I want to do, as I've tried to think about the sort of the next chapter of my life, and Bonnie and I have debated this, what should we do? What do you do when you're the former CEO? What do you do when you've been the CEO of the largest firm in the world? What do you do when you've accomplished everything that there is to accomplish in professional services, at least by virtue of the way in which you choose to measure that? Should you get on your horse, ride off into the sunset and declare victory and get out of the way? That's what almost everybody does, and maybe that's what my successor wanted me to do. I don't think so. But what I've decided to do is I've decided to define success for the next chapter of my life as helping leaders succeed. So what I view this opportunity and this privilege is my opportunity to try to be helpful to you. And I want you to try to listen with that kind of a context or that kind of perspective, because that's what I'm genuinely trying to do. I want to be helpful to you as leaders, the leaders you are, in the roles that you play today. And I want to be helpful to you for the leaders that you will one day be and the leaders that you will become. And that's how I'd like to spend this next 30 minutes, is with that spirit of I want to try to help leaders succeed. Now, what every business leader aspires to is you want to one day have the privilege of actually being a professor. You think that the professors have the whole world figured out. Life is better for a professor than for any other person on the planet. So then, in that notion of the spirit of trying to be a professor, what I'm going to do now in the next 30 minutes, and I talked with the dean before and he's given me permission to do this, is I'm going to give you Leadership 101. You get 1 hour credit for 10 minutes. You're going to like me. I'm then going to give you Leadership 201, so you get another hour of credit for another 10 minutes. And then I'm going to try to conclude on Leadership 301. But if we can just think about leadership in a building block kind of way, I want to try to do that, and I'm going to have to push myself along to try to accomplish that. So, Leadership 101. What is the fundamental things that you need to do as a leader? The question that I love to ask people, and I do this all the time. I sit down with CEOs of some of the largest companies in the world, and I do it almost every day, almost every week. And one of the questions I love to ask them is, what are the conditions that need to be in place in your organization in order for your people to feel that they're well led? And what I'm fond of doing, and if we had the gift of time we would, I'd pause here and I would try to, and we'd work on the whiteboard, and I'd try to get you to tell me what are the conditions that you need to have in place in order for you to feel like you're working for a well-led organization. And I like to try to amplify that with these business leaders by saying, when your young people, when the young knowledge workers in your organization go home at Thanksgiving and they sit down with their parents and their parents say, Jimmy, I'm really interested. Is Deloitte a well-led organization? What are the conditions that need to be in place for that young professional to feel that they're working for a well-led organization? It's a great question, and I have wonderful 1 hour discussions with executives about that. My view is I can take their thinking and their responses, and I can almost organize everything around those three very simple words. That clarity is essential. In order for a professional to feel that they're well led, there has to be clarity. There has to be the right climate, and there has to be a commitment to sort of develop, to build capability. But I think an organization that has clarity, the right climate, and the capability for success is going to be a well-led organization. Now, I told you I was going to try to avoid the emotive part of how I sometimes speak when I use my personal stories. So let me just try to drive home one point on this idea of climate with a story that isn't mine, but rather belongs to someone else. I think part of that climate, when I earlier had my first slide up and I talked about the importance of respect, I think that has to be part of the climate. People have to feel respected. I think that's one of the fundamental core needs that we all have as individuals. Not only do we want to have food, clothing, and shelter, each one of us, 100% of us, want to be valued, respected, and appreciated. And if you're working in an organization where you don't feel valued, respected, or appreciated, because that is such a fundamental core need, you're going to leave. You're going to go someplace and find another place where you, in fact, will feel respected. Now, let me drive that home with a simple story. When you write a book and you have a PR firm out working, you can give lots of interviews. And I've provided lots and lots of interviews since publishing this book. My favorite interview came when I was interviewed by Frances Hesselbein. I don't know, is anyone familiar with Frances Hesselbein? Has anyone ever heard of Frances Hesselbein? The dean knows Frances Hesselbein. I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't know who that was, so my guys gave me my one-page briefing note. And I'm reading my one-page briefing note, getting ready for this interview, and they said that Peter Drucker, who's one of the great gurus of management thinking and management writing out at Claremont College, it's now the late Peter Drucker, but he's widely quoted, and many people, and he's written lots and lots of stuff about leadership. And Peter Drucker said, in response to an interview from a New York Times writer, who is the best leader in corporate America today? Or in America today? Who's the best leader in America today? And Peter Drucker said, Frances Hesselbein. And this writer sort of smiled and said, well, that's interesting in the nonprofit sector, but I'm really interested, who's the best leader today, Peter, in your view, in corporate America? And then Peter Drucker said, in response to the second question, Frances could lead any company in this country better than the leader who today is in its chair. And I started thinking, I'm excited to be interviewed by this Frances Hesselbein. And so when I sat down, she says, Jim, I'm looking forward to this interview. And I said, Frances, I'm looking forward to interviewing you. And we sat down and had a go at it, and Leader to Leader posted a little tiny snippet of that on YouTube. But Frances Hesselbein was the CEO of the Girl Scouts. 2.3 million members of the Girl Scouts, 800,000 volunteers driving the Girl Scouts. So she's leading 3 million people. And I thought, what a special lady. And I sat down with her, and I loved this conversation. I absolutely loved this conversation. And now, the point that I want to try to punctuate this notion of respect with. When I finished with Frances, she proudly gave me her book, My Life in Leadership, and she complimented me about my book as one. And so I was on a flight to Minneapolis, and I was reading her book, and I just started digesting her book. I loved her book. The opening paragraph says, everything that I needed to know to be an effective leader of the Girl Scouts, I learned in the tough coal and steel town of western Pennsylvania where I was raised. And I learned from my parents, and I learned from my grandmother. And then she tells one story to try to drive home this idea of respect. She says as a young girl, when she was 8 or 9 years old, she'd go over to her grandmother's house, and there were 2 beautiful Chinese vases on the shelf. And she, as a young girl, always wanted to take them down and be able to play with them because they were so beautiful. And her grandmother would never allow her to take those vases off the shelf. And so finally, some number of years later, I'm not sure how many, when Frances was begging to be able to play with those vases, her grandmother finally explained to her why she couldn't take those vases off the shelf. And she said they used to have in this little tough town in western Pennsylvania a Chinese laundryman, Mr. Yi, and he wore his hair with long braided ponytails. And the boys liked to chase him down the street and pull on his ponytails and make fun of this little Chinese laundryman. But Frances's grandmother always referred to him as Mr. Yi, always called him Mr. Yi whenever she would get his laundry from him. And one day, her grandmother later told her, there was a knock on the door, she went to the door, there was Mr. Yi, and he had 2 big packages. And he said he wanted to give these to Frances's grandmother. And so she opened them and saw these beautiful Chinese vases. And she said, oh, I can't take these. These are just much too nice. And then this Chinese laundryman said, I've lived away from my family as long as I can. I have to go back to China. And I can't take these with me. And I want you to have them. Because you're the only one in town who called me Mr. Yi. And that respect just stayed with that little girl, Frances Hesselbein. And that importance of respect for others, she carried with her to the point where Peter Drucker would describe her as the best leader in the country. Now, fast forward the clock many, many years. I'm sitting in France's office in New York. And I visit with business executives all the time. And it isn't uncommon for a business executive to walk me to the elevator. Some business executives actually hand you off to their EA, and the EA walks you to the elevator, or they point to the exit sign and tell you to find your way out. but many business executives will walk you to the elevator. So I'm with Frances, and she walks me to the elevator. Nothing surprising about that. I get on the elevator. Frances gets on the elevator with me. And I said, Frances, I'm a big boy. I've been in New York for 30 years. I know how to find my way out of the building. Thank you very much. And then she just stops and she looks up at me and she says, Jim, my grandmother taught me that you see your guests to the garden gate out of respect. And I have not forgotten that. I'm walking you out of this building. Now the rest of the story. Frances is 96 years old. I've visited with thousands of executives around the world. I've been walked to the front door of the building one time. Respect, fundamental, core to what it takes. Let me resolve Leadership 101 with, this is what the leader of one of the largest organizations in this country, I haven't sought his permission to quote him, but so I'll just say they have $50 billion in revenue, over 100,000 employees. I asked him this question. We were at the end of our time, and he says, Jim, I want to reflect on that. And so he wrote me a letter. And this is what he said that he wants to provide to his people, that this is what he believes people who want to be working for a well-led organization is what has to be in place. In the interest of time, I'm not going to walk you through each of those bullets, but I think each of those bullets is very instructive. And I think you can see how you could organize those bullets under climate, or clarity, climate, and capability. But let's just look at capability for a moment, because I think there's a real perfect point of emphasis. I also asked him for his leadership development program for his people. And this idea that you're in a well-led organization that invests in your development and the development of the team. Think of this. This is the CEO of a Fortune 50 company. What percentage of his time do you think he devotes to developing others? A Fortune 50 company. How much time do you think he spends focused on developing his team and others inside his organization? We could get a wide range of percentages if I was willing to spend the time to try to do it. But the answer is 50%. He believes he spends 50% of his time focused on developing others. And then when you walk through his lead program, it was fascinating to me because his executive team, he holds to a standard of 40%. He wants his direct reports to spend 40% of their time developing others. He wants his vice presidents to spend 30% of their time developing others. He wants his supervisors to spend 25% of their time developing others, and he wants their managers to be spending 20% of their time developing others. When you think about leadership, and you think about this idea of followership, and you think about the notion and the challenge of, I want to be a leader in fact, not just a leader in position. If you want to be a leader in fact, demonstrate to your people you care about them, and you're ready to help develop and build their capabilities. And you're not going to view spending time helping them improve their performance as a waste of your time or an annoyance. You're going to view it as a core part of your job that you have a passion for and you love. Okay, the first hour of credit I think I've now given. Leadership 101 is now done. So let's try to move on now to Leadership 201. But that notion of conditions, what I want to try to drive home is I want you to think about your role as a leader today. I want you to think about the team that you're trying to lead in whatever sphere, in whatever role you're playing, and I want you to think about what it takes in order for you to be effective in that role. And then go to work on putting in place the conditions for your success as a leader. And if you'll focus on and work hard on putting in place those conditions for success, you'll be successful. I think this is a timeless leadership challenge. It's been with us for as long as people have tried to play the role of leader. Is how do you bring together a group of diverse individuals and create an environment for them to work together effectively to accomplish some common goals and objectives. And so I get asked the question all the time, why a new book on leadership and why a new book now? And I believe the world has changed since all of the other 10,000 books on leadership were written. And I think that what we're doing with technology today is different than where we've been with respect to technology over a relatively long period of time. I think that living in a pull world where we're going to pull data instead of rely on data that gets pushed to us is dramatically different. If you're leading in a pull world as opposed to leading in a push world, it's a different leadership challenge. And I also believe that globalization has fundamentally transformed how business is conducted. It truly has changed the world in a very tangible, real, and long-term basis. And I believe that Globalization 1.0 let's establish a presence in those high-growth markets so we can participate in the superior growth in those markets is interesting. I think Globalization 2.0 is dramatically more interesting. Are we prepared in our mature markets to compete with companies headquartered in those emerging markets? Are we ready to compete on our soil with the Chinese? Are we ready to compete in our markets with the Indians? Are we ready to compete in markets that really matter with the Brazilians? Look who just acquired it. I'm a St. Louis boy. Let's applaud the Cardinals, huh? Pretty impressive. Game 6, I'm sure there's some Texans here that aren't happy about it. Larry and I had a little fun with a little email conversation. He told me it was going to be just fine on game 6 and 7 if it was split. One for the Cardinals, one for Texas. I told him I wasn't sure that was going to be fair. But anyway, who do you think owns Anheuser-Busch? Think of that for a minute. Anheuser-Busch. If you've ever been to St. Louis, let me tell you, baby. Anheuser-Busch is St. Louis. When you're driving away from Cardinal Stadium and you see that Anheuser-Busch eagle flapping its wings on that neon sign, the Brazilians own Anheuser-Busch. If you're Coors, are you ready now to compete with Anheuser-Busch and the Brazilians? That's Globalization 2.0, dramatically changing the way in which we're working, in my view. And the demographics, absolutely, dramatic changes. Now, here's the point that I want to try to drive home on this notion of Leadership 201. What percentage of the workforce, we can personalize it to me, what percentage of the Deloitte workforce is really passionate about what they do? Really passionate about what they do. I mean, when they're shaving, they're thinking. When they wake up at night, they're thinking about the things they're doing. They're really passionate about the things they do. Or just simply corporate America. That's the only data that I really have is corporate America. And the reality of this as I click down through this slide is, this is heartbreaking for a business leader. The data that I'm about to show you is heartbreaking for a business leader. Totally heartbreaking for a business leader. But this comes from my guys at the Deloitte Center for the Edge Innovation, and they're taking it from a survey of about 3,200 knowledge workers. But when you look at that workforce, 20% are really passionate about what they do. You can get another 20% that you're willing to attach the word engaged to. Think about that. 40% of your workforce now is either engaged or passionate. Now let me try to help you understand how significant that is to a business leader. Let's think about Deloitte. $30 billion in revenue. If I've got 40% of my workforce engaged, or passionate about the things they're doing, that means 60% of my workforce I can't describe with those nice words. How much money do you think I pay that 60%? I'm paying that 60%, allocating profits to or paying salaries, probably north of $12 billion. How would you like to pay $12 billion to people who are not engaged or passionate about what they're doing? How would you feel about that as a leader? Unbelievable, huh? But real. So what is the leadership challenge? What is leadership all about? What is it that you really need to do if you want to be effective as a leader? In my view, I think we can take the energy. I earlier said this timeless leadership challenge was the ability to bring together a group of diverse individuals, create an environment for them to work together effectively to accomplish those shared goals. So you have to work really hard to figure out what are those shared objectives. And you need to work hard to get ownership of those shared objectives. And then after you have that ownership, how do you get the energy of the organization channeled towards them? And I think you can disaggregate that energy that you're going to be able to obtain from your team, have that focused on those shared objectives. I think you can disaggregate that into the contractual commitment of the team. What is it that you're contractually obligated to do as an employee or as a colleague at the organization? and then add to it the discretionary effort. I think that the leadership challenge and the winning edge and those who really truly distinguish themselves, they're able to get that discretionary effort. They're able to unleash the power of their people. They're able to unleash the capability of their people. They're able to bring that combined energy, and I'm absolutely convinced that that is the source of the winning edge. I spend tons of time in the marketplace. I'm an aggressive competitor. I'm a terrible loser. And when I don't win, I spend some real reflective time. And I oftentimes conclude someone was better able than me to obtain the very best from their people. Somebody outcompeted me in the marketplace today. And what can I learn about that? But I think this really, 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 really matters as it relates to leadership, is that ability to get the very best from your people. There's lots of ways you can express that. You can express it as the discretionary effort, as I'm attempting on that slide. I think you can also express it in the context of, I can obtain the arms and legs. I have 182,000 people. I can get their arms and legs. What do I need to do to get their hearts and minds? If I get their hearts and minds, no one on the planet can compete with Deloitte. When I get the very best of Deloitte in the marketplace, no one can compete with us. Doing that is so much harder than just simply saying it. Now, a little quick video to try to illustrate a little bit more on this.
What is leadership? Many say it is all about people. They say a leader's job is to develop people's sense of belonging to their group, so they have a strong shared identity. Others say leadership is all about productivity. They think a leader's job is to get people to have a common interpretation of how they are going to work together. Some others say leadership is all about purpose. They feel a leader's job is to drive people's commitment to the goals of the organization. In other words, high directional intensity. We believe that real leadership involves all three of these things. We call it working as one, and we think it is all about getting a cohesive group of people to work together productively towards a common purpose. As one. It's a short phrase, really. Only 5 letters, but those 5 letters are filled with meaning and inspiration. They make all the difference between a group of individuals and a unified team. Add these 5 letters and the entire meaning changes. Working versus working as one. Winning versus winning as one. Think of the possibilities. The sources of inspiration are endless. Believing as one, smarter as one, stronger as one. These 5 letters symbolize the translation of individual action into collective power. They describe how individuals can achieve amazing things together. Think about your own organization. Do your people think of themselves as one group? Are they truly committed to your goals and direction? Do they have the same ideas about how to work together? Do you actually measure how well your people work together? Did you even know that you could measure that? You can. We have developed the knowledge and tools that will truly enhance the ability of leaders, both our own as well as our clients, to get their people to work as one in their organizations. As one, individual action, collective power.
I love Steve's voice as he tries to just simply pull that together and this idea of what leadership is all about, because we can think about leadership from many different dimensions. And you can actually look at this little graphic and say, leadership is all about creating a strong sense of belonging. It's picking your team and having them have a strong sense of belonging. You're a great leader if you can create a sense of belonging. And then others would say, no, leadership is all about getting alignment and commitment to the things that we want to do together. What is it that we're going to be working to try to accomplish? And some would suggest, no, leadership is all about how do you maximize the productivity of the enterprise? How does Quigley drive revenue per employee ever higher? He's a great leader if he can get productivity high. And what we believe is that leadership, the way that we like to think about leadership, the way that we want to talk about leadership, we think about it in the context of requiring all three. And what we've done with our research and what we've attempted to try to accomplish with the book is we've tried to change the conversation on leadership from a list of attributes to the whole idea of organizational behavior. Can we think about leadership in the context of the ability to have the organization work together as one towards its common goals and objectives? And it's a very different conversation than the conversation that just focuses on, let's talk about the attributes of a great leader. There's tons of leadership books written about the attributes of great leaders. But I think that is a very shallow look at a very huge challenge. Because if we can get to organizational behavior, now you have to talk about the leader. You have to talk about those that you're trying to lead. You need to talk about the organization and how you're trying to work together. And I believe when you start talking about organizational behavior as the leadership agenda, instead of a list of attributes attached to one highly visible individual, you're having a much richer conversation, my view. So, shared identity. Can you create a sense of belonging? I like to highlight this by just sharing with you a conversation that I had with Ed Breen at the time that he was appointed as the CEO of Tyco. I've known Ed for a lot of years, and we've worked together in some other client situations. So I was sitting in his palatial office looking over Central Park. He stepped into Dennis Kozlowski's office. But just remember Tyco. For those of you that are students of corporate history, think about what was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal for weeks. We're just simply airing the dirty laundry of Tyco. And when Ed stepped in, you know, I'm an aggressive professional services guy. I wanted to meet with Ed. And so I was in his office. And I said, Ed, I'm really interested in what is your agenda? What are the key things that you're trying to accomplish? And are there some areas where we, Deloitte, might be of value to you? And he said to me without hesitation, Jim, I want to make the Tyco team proud to wear the Tyco t-shirts again. Just think about that if you're a Tyco employee with what you'd read on the front page of the Wall Street Journal for 9 months. What did you do with your Tyco t-shirt when you went to your kid's soccer match on Saturday? Was it the first t-shirt you pulled out of the drawer? Proudly put it on and headed off to the soccer match, or did you leave that in the bottom of the drawer, baby? You were hoping no one knew you worked for Tyco. You didn't want to have any Tyco conversation on that Saturday. And Ed, as the leader, said he wanted to create an environment where the Tyco team was proud to wear those t-shirts again. Get to a strong sense of belonging. And then this whole notion of getting agreement on what it is that you want to accomplish. Can you get alignment and commitment behind that exercise? I need to sort of click through here really quick to finish Leadership 201. We're going to have to do Leadership 301 after 1:30. So my advertisement, I was going to give you 201 in 10 minutes, or 101 in 10 minutes, 201 in 10 minutes, and 301 in 10 minutes. I lied. I apologize. Let me try to illustrate this notion of alignment and commitment. Let's just say mythically, with this very simple, silly example, that the strategy was we want to lift this table using 2 fingers. And what would happen with a typical team? What do you think would occur? There'd be some that would be ready to go. Let's get this table up. I can get 2 fingers under that table. Let's get it lifted. You'd have some that were ready to be supported, but they weren't about to get their fingers dirty. They didn't want their fingers underneath that table. They're concerned somebody might have put their chewing gum there. They're not sure what really happened, but they're going to be cheerleaders on the side. But they themselves are not going to do anything to execute on that strategy. And then you're going to have another group of people who just aren't sure. I don't know whether I support this. I just haven't decided. And so they're just sort of standing off to the side, trying to figure out what's going on. And then you've got some that all they want to think about was Game 7 of the Cardinals. Their whole mind is just around the World Series and looking forward to smiling at Larry when you talk about who the champions of the World Series were. And they didn't even hear when somebody said, I want to see if we can lift this table with 2 fingers. And then you're going to have some that are going to say, no way, baby. I'm going to do everything in my God-given power to prevent that table from coming off the floor. Now, when you think about leadership, and what we've attempted to do with our book, is we think of that book not just as a leadership book, we think of it as a strategy execution book. And when we undertook it, when Meredith and I debated what we were trying to accomplish, we emphasized that what we wanted to do is help leaders be able to execute on strategy. And that's what we're about. Just think about how effective you could be as a leader if you actually had agreed and understood what were the key elements of the strategy that you were trying to accomplish, and if you actually knew what percentage of your workforce was committed, they're ready to lift that table, what percentage is supportive, they're not going to do anything themselves, but they're happy to support somebody else doing it, that portion that is undecided, the portion that's unaware, the portion that was opposed. What if you knew that for your entire workforce, for every element of the strategy that really mattered to you? Would you as a leader become more effective at your ability to execute strategy? What we believe is that leadership is both an art and a science. And in the area of science, some things that can be measured. If measured, you'll actually become more effective. And so if you could, in your mind's eye, see directional intensity statements drafted for each element of the strategy that must be executed in order to accomplish your common goals and objectives, and if you actually knew how your team lined up in terms of their commitment to execute, I think you'd become more effective at your ability to drive strategy execution. And I'm going to declare stop for our 10-minute break, and we're going to call that the end of Leadership 201, if you'll allow me. I hope you're interested in 301. Those of you that are able to come back, I look forward to seeing you in a few minutes. for success, how important clarity is. I don't want to gloss over that. And then this whole 201, the ability to actually help people have a strong sense of belonging and then get an alignment and commitment for the things that you want to do. Can you increase the number of people who are willing to get their fingers under that table to try to lift it? Now, the third, Leadership 301, and this is for those of you that have bought the book or those of you who spent time with the book, we spent almost all of our time in the book on Leadership 301 of trying to get agreement on how people want to work together. And so when you start in the book, I wanted to do that 101, 201, just to try to emphasize that when we wrote the book, we didn't think Leadership 101 and Leadership 201 were unimportant. But when you get to page 320, it's just how much stuff do you want to include in that book? And we just felt there was lots written about that whole notion of clarity and trust and respect. Lots of people have written that stuff, so we chose not to write that. We don't think anyone has written this stuff that I'm about to show you, which is how do people want to work together? And what I want you to think about for a minute is I want you to go back in your mind's eye to my little chart where I showed you that 20% of the workforce was passionate about what they do and 20% was engaged. That's if you want to look at that from a positive point of view. If you want to look at that from a negative point of view and say 2/3 of your workforce is not engaged, why are they not engaged? Why wouldn't they be passionate about what they're doing? And part of my hypothesis is there's just simply a leader-follower mismatch in terms of how leadership is actually being executed and exercised, and that causes people to actually lose some of their passion. Let me see if I can try to drive that point home. What we did with our research is we looked at 60 case studies where we felt we had seen effective collective action, where there really was the ability to bring together individual action and have that get organized towards collective power. And when we looked at the various attributes of these case studies and used data analytics, we found that they actually grouped around and they became quite similar as it relates to some key attributes. And we decided as we continued with our research is we had to get the language refined so it was very accessible and easily understood. We used to have titles that attached to each of these archetypes that you just wouldn't be memorable. They wouldn't stay in your mind. And the language that we had chosen wasn't going to help you understand what it was we were trying to communicate. So we decided to look at leader-follower pairs. And with these leader-follower pairs, we were then able to describe these 8 archetypes. Now, I am not here to suggest to you, nor do I even believe, that these are the only 8 models that can be used to try to sustain collective action, exercise collective leadership, obtain as one behavior in my language. But these are 8 that we felt were sufficiently distinct that we were able to talk about them, write about them, and the way the book is organized is we have one chapter for each one of these leader-follower pairs or each one of these archetypes. And what we've done is we've organized them around an x-axis and a y-axis, with the y-axis illustrating the whole notion of where does the macro direction come from. So at the top, the notion of landlord and tenants, it's very top-down. The landlord sets the rules. The landlord's power increases with the more tenants that they have. The tenants are able to opt in. Do I want to actually be a tenant with that landlord? And then we illustrate it with the book going through each of the attributes of landlords and tenants with case studies. And so the easiest way to illustrate that is the iPad. Apple is the landlord. Apple as the landlord sets the rules. If you want to be a tenant on the iPad, you have to follow the rules that Apple establishes. And so 300,000 plus application developers decide they want to be tenants in that property, and they follow those rules. And Apple's power grows as they have more tenants. But that's the landlord and tenant model for obtaining collective action. Apple's able to get collective action from those 300,000 developers using the landlord and tenants model. If you go down to the bottom of that y-axis, now the macro direction is emergent, and we illustrate this with the open source software, Linux, Linus Torvalds, bringing together thousands and thousands of software engineers writing open source software. but organizing around an idea. We want an alternative to Microsoft. We want an alternative to SAP. And that open source platform, Linux, then gets built. On the x-axis, we illustrate that in the context of the individual tasks. How scripted are the individual tasks? So on the left side of the x-axis, highly scripted, and then using the leader-follower pair to illustrate that of conductor and orchestra. And then on the other side of the x-axis, now the micro tasks are not scripted at all, but very emergent. And we illustrate that in the book with a case study of Cirque du Soleil. If you were going to try to produce a new Cirque du Soleil show that you wanted to take on the road, how would you do it? How would you assemble a team? What would the business process be? What is it that you'd be working to try to get everybody on the same page and innovating and experimenting and coming forward to create a show that you're ready to take on the road? And then the other four are just simply hybrid models. And then we illustrate all of these with case studies in the book. I happen to say that my default archetype would be architect and builder. I like to be someone that has a bold ambition. And I like to say to my partners, I want clear, undisputed leadership in professional services. I'm content with nothing less. And we should aim for nothing less than clear leadership in professional services. And then I want them empowered as builders to go out and help us put together that firm that could actually go after that bold ambition. And Ratan Tata, when he drives down the street in Mumbai and he sees a family of 4 on a motorcycle, that doesn't look very safe to him. He doesn't think that's how a family of 4 ought to move. But if you've ever been to Mumbai, and if you've ever driven around Mumbai, you see lots of families of 4 on a motorcycle. So Ratan Tata wanted to build the Nano, the car for the people, a $2,500 car, his bold ambition. And then how do you organize the suppliers? How do you organize the manufacturing process? I'm 6'1". I sit very comfortably in that Nano. I went to one of the showrooms. I was really interested to see a $2,500 car. What he's done is, I think pretty spectacular. Medco as a way to illustrate that conductor and orchestra, 3,000 pharmacists, 12,000 computer-based rules, filling prescriptions, making sure that you're not going to allow medications that would actually conflict to go to a patient and have some of the adverse consequences that could trigger. I love the Dabawalas. If you've ever read those case studies, fundamentally illiterate lunchbox delivery people in India pick up with a zero defect kind of approach meals at the home and deliver that hot meal to the office buildings in Mumbai. And they work with a sense of pride, and they work with an ability to come together as a team, but very much captain and sports team. And now I think anytime, I really have to hurry, anytime you want to actually really talk about something, I think it's best if you illustrate it with a real case study. So in the spirit of that leadership is both an art and science, let me just show you a little bit of the Deloitte case study. This is our effort to try to measure shared identity. The chart looks very complicated, so let me just try to emphasize that what we've done across the bottom is we've just simply looked at the components of Deloitte. So you start with the individual account team, then you can look at an industry team, a line of business or a function. You can look at a member firm, an individual part of the Deloitte network, or you could look at the portion of the organization that I'm leading at the center. And then we ask our people through a web-based survey, how core to your identity is Deloitte, and how core at these various levels of Deloitte. And then what it informs the leader, remember that our goal was strategy execution. I want to execute strategy. What would you do if you were the global leader and you actually saw that the member firms, there was stronger shared identity with the member firm than there was with you at the center? And I think you'd do exactly what I did. You're going to drive strategy execution through the member firms. You're going to get those member firm leaders in the boat with you. You're going to have them on the videos talking about the As One strategy and your ability to drive its execution. And then we disaggregate here by region. So is the shared identity of the Americas versus Europe versus Asia different in any material way? And then we can also look at that by line of business. We can look at it by gender. We can look at it by tenure of partners. Now, 2 fingers under the table to lift the table. Now let me just try to drive home the importance of leadership as a science. I'm a client service maniac. All of my partners know I'm a client service maniac. About the only thing I care about is client service, modestly exaggerated. I hand-selected 500 partners that I gave my As One survey to. My global executive, their direct reports, fundamentally, and my country leaders, fundamentally gives me my top 250 partners in my global organization. Wanting to have a broader perspective, I then went to my Young Partner Advisory Council, 4 classes of 25, gave me another 100. I went to my succession planning list and pulled off my 150 of my future leaders. So 250 younger partners, lots of runway in front of them, top 250 partners. They know that I'm passionate about client service. They know that I really care deeply about client service. I have, as the leader, every right to assume, I have every right to assume that if I hand select 500 partners that I provide a survey to, and I say to them, are you committed to take action? Get your fingers under the table and lift it. Are you committed to take action to, for each client project, deliver the Deloitte client promise as one every time? Deliver a borderless Deloitte in client service execution. Delighted that 45% of my partners that I surveyed said they were committed to take action to make that happen. Disappointed that 20% of them said they themselves aren't going to do anything, but they're happy to support others who will do that. Shocked to learn that 25% of my partners are undecided on whether they actually would take action to execute on that directional intensity statement that highlights the importance of client service in my strategy. And no less shocked to learn that I've got 8% of them unaware. Now, what does that do? That helps the leader understand how you drive strategy execution when you understand how your people are thinking. It helps you understand where you're going to put your systems, your processes, your key performance metrics, and what you have to measure. And it helps you understand what you need to do from a communication point of view, how you have to market your ideas, what you need to do to try to get them on board. But you dramatically increase the understanding of the leader and the leader's ability to drive strategy execution. I had 10 directional intensity statements that went with my strategy as I went out with that. And I was able to, this was a strategy refresh process, and I was using it in large part to make it as participative as possible, because what I wanted was a great deal of ownership of the strategy as we go forward. And then what is the model that people wanted to work in? Is there a single model for the enterprise, or is there a different model for each of the perhaps business processes that you perform? I'm delighted that I have lots of folks that are very comfortable with the architect and builder model. That's what I like. But I have a whole bunch of people who think of themselves as volunteers, and I have a bunch of people who think of themselves as citizens. When the leader understands that leader-follower mismatch, that I want to be an architect, how does an architect lead volunteers and citizens? Your ability to execute strategy goes up dramatically if you actually inform yourself, and then you become overt about how an architect is going to lead a volunteer and a citizen. That's what they wanted to be. Oops, I didn't put those other slides in. I've got, at Deloitte Australia, I've got another slide that just shows we've used our As One diagnostic for 3 years in a row, and the length of those green bars just gets dramatically longer each year as the depth of understanding of the strategy and the commitment to the strategy goes up. And what we've done in Australia, to their enormous credit, I give them huge credit, they have actually, to deal with this notion of the leader-follower mismatch of architect and then citizens and volunteers, their leadership model they characterize as blueprint plus ballot. So the leader can put forward the blueprint, but he must provide an opportunity for those volunteers and citizens to vote on that blueprint, and are they committed to act? And if there's not strong support, then Guillaume doesn't go forward, and he works hard to try to understand what the objections are. But they are taking market share hugely from our competitors. 3 years ago, we were 55% of number 3 in Australia, and next year we're going to be number 2 in Australia. As one, bringing together that individual action and obtaining from it that collective power. Really, truly driving and executing on strategy 101, 201, and 301. What I want to do is I want to just show you just a couple. Can you help me with that little video for just 1 second? There's just one more little video clip I want to show you. While that's teeing up, what I want to try to drive home to you is, as a leader, you're challenged when you're trying to get organizational behavior from an organization, and especially if you have 182,000 people. It's one thing to get your global executive, my 20 guys in the room, and really have a go at it with them and get them aligned. Bring that up whenever you're ready. And so this is an illustration of a little video that was sent to me. I was at home working, produced by my guys in South Africa. So just think of a group of consultants and accountants in South Africa coming together to put together this little video. And think about you're trying to drive message into 180,000 people, and then how I felt when I saw this video, what these guys had produced. I loved what they'd done. Listen carefully to the language that they're using. Think of South Africa. Think of apartheid.
Who we are, we've come a long way.
Deloitte professionals working together.
Crawl to a run.
We exceed expectations, sustain, grow, acquire, coming together as one. We share information and grow as a team, diverse and unique as they come. In this celebration, we build and improve. We've come together as one. Sing we've come together, we'll stand here forever as one. Sing
I loved this when I was sitting at home on Saturday and I actually saw this. And what I started to think is that maybe, just maybe, my message goes deeper than my global executive. Maybe just this message of as one finds its way down into the troops, into the ranks. They're willing to come together and write music. They're willing to go rent a studio and actually produce this as they're trying to reinforce the Deloitte culture. Think about South Africa. If you've ever been, Bonnie and I love the people of South Africa. We love our partners in South Africa. But look at those faces on that video. Think about that strategy, that ambition as a professional services firm coming together as one. Watch those kids with the passion they perform it. That's out on YouTube. And you can actually go watch that if you are interested in those 5 minutes. I'm really interested in those 5 minutes. But I get a kick out of these kids. But it tells me that the message can actually go deeper than your direct reports. That maybe, just maybe, this ambition of organizational behavior, thinking about leadership in the context of your ability to obtain organizational behavior, when you have the troops producing videos to reinforce the Deloitte way, to reinforce the Deloitte culture, to reinforce the ambition of as one, I think we're making progress. I'm very proud of my guys in Australia. I showed that to my guys in Brazil. They told me that they were going to outdo our South Africans. But I think it's great when you actually have our young people ready to actually compete at that level, and they're ready to try to reinforce the culture. That's my effort at Leadership 301. I'm sorry that I went so long, but we have a few minutes for questions. If you have any questions, I'm happy to respond to any questions that you have about leadership. And if you have any questions for Bonnie, she's delighted to respond to those. Please. As one. It isn't more complicated than as one. And I really believe, and I'm not objective about it, I quickly acknowledge, I really believe that you can take the whole leadership challenge that has existed forever. How do you bring together a group of diverse individuals and create an environment for them and really galvanize them to work together effectively to accomplish those shared goals? That challenge has been with us forever. I think you can capture that challenge in those two simple words, as one. And I think the leader that can cause his organization to behave as one, and I don't care at what level. It doesn't have to be in the CEO's office. It can be any component of the organization. If you can get as one behavior, you'll win. Come here, and then there, and then there. Please.
I read your book this summer, and one of the questions that I kept asking myself is like when you surveyed Deloitte and you noticed that a lot of people were here at the architect and builder, and some were, community leader and volunteers. What if you have in the same group or in the same teams people who view themselves differently? Like, for example, for me, senator and citizens is the hardest group for me that I would work with. But if I had people who felt that they were that way, and other people in the same team who felt that they were a different type of team, do you have to transform yourself to kind of, I don't know, shape to them? Or do you try and shape them into kind of like a middle ground?
It's a brilliant question. It's really a brilliant question. Everybody hear the question? The answer to your question is yes. I think both have to change. And what I think we're doing by introducing this language and bringing forward these archetypes is we're just simply putting the conversation in the room. Because before you put the conversation in the room, no one even understood that you had that leader-follower mismatch, or you had a misalignment on the team of how people wanted to work together. What the model does is it gives you a chance to have a conversation about that. And as you have that conversation, you can then accomplish what it is you're trying to do. In other words, you're going to be able to work together effectively for those common goals by just getting the conversation going. Bonnie can tell you about Guillaume. Guillaume Swiggers is, don't let me exaggerate, Bonnie, 6'3", 225 pounds. He's a rugby player from South Africa. He's the CEO in Australia. He's one big, tough guy. Guillaume grew up in South Africa. Guillaume thinks of himself as an architect. He has 70 direct reports. I had my research team in Australia. When he saw that he had a whole bunch of partners who thought of themselves as volunteers and as citizens, what is he going to do? What is this big, tough rugby player from South Africa going to do as he's trying to lead these Aussies? So they came up with that business model of blueprint plus ballot. And if you knew Guillaume, trust me, that you would understand that that doesn't feel natural to him. Balloting his partners on what he wants to do, there's nothing natural in that for him. And if you're purely a volunteer or a citizen, it doesn't necessarily feel natural to you to receive a blueprint. You want to be able to be in control of the direction. You want to be able to drive it. That's who you think you are. You're a partner in a professional services firm with a strong brand. You're highly marketable. You're volunteering to work with Deloitte. There's tons of places you could go. What we do with that idea of the blueprint plus ballot, Guillaume gives them a chance to be heard. And when Guillaume assembles, he's got 70 people on his extended leadership team, and he puts forward his blueprint on what he wants to do. And then they, just with an audience response system, they indicate whether they're supportive. And if he doesn't have the support he wants, he does not go forward. And he works them hard to understand their objectives, and then he comes back 90 days later with a revised plan. I will put my guys in Australia up against any firm. We own professional services in Australia in terms of the direction, the momentum. Go read the media in Australia. The only firm you're going to read about is Deloitte in terms of innovation and in terms of leadership. Think of that. 3 years ago, 55% of number 3. That's who we were. We're going to be number 2 in Australia next year. We can hire a partner from any firm in Australia we want. We can take a partner from any professional services firm in Australia. But what happened is both of them changed. The partners down here kind of figured out that big, tough rugby player, we have to listen to his blueprints. We have to give him input, but then we're willing to work together. The next question was, I think, back this way. Please.
My question is transitioning from I was wondering if in your own personal experience, do you find yourself transitioning in different relationships to different archetypes? And what are the challenges associated with that working with different groups? And then how do you solve that?
The way that you solve it, first of all, it is a challenge. You're absolutely right. And you're starting to understand why does such a small percentage of the workforce, why are they passionate? Why is a small percentage of them really, truly engaged? If you want to be a citizen and you have somebody treating you like a general and soldier, you're not going to be very passionate or very engaged. Just one case study to try to illustrate that point. Even though you might have as a leader a default archetype, my case, architect and builder, I don't think that archetype is the right answer for every business process in the enterprise. So one quick illustration. John Chambers, one of the most tenured, I know he's been through some tumultuous times recently, but one of the most tenured CEOs in Silicon Valley. I have a lot of respect for John. I enjoy meeting with John. I have a lot of respect for John. He's been in the CEO seat for a long period of time. When I sat down with John and reviewed this with him, what he said to me was, Jim, when we're trying to develop a new product, my business process is absolutely producer and creative team. The innovation process and what I challenge those teams to do as they're trying to bring forward a new value proposition they can take to the market, we absolutely use that archetype. But then he said, but once I commit capital and we're going to build out this product, he said, I become general and soldiers, and I'm going to go to market in a highly directive way with really clear accountability. And I'm going to have my key performance indicators, and I'm going to be holding my regional sales force accountable to those key performance indicators. I'm going to be reviewing their performance every month. And so he doesn't try to pretend that his only archetype is producer and creative team. And again, I have to quickly acknowledge I'm not objective about this, but I actually believe that we've made a substantive contribution to the management literature, to the leadership literature, and to the literature related to strategy execution by providing a vocabulary that will enable changing how, in fact, you're going to behave with an individual business process or an individual challenge. And what some of our clients have done when we've used our diagnostic and taken it to market, they'll look at a challenge, and then the team, and it's because we've been working with them, obviously, but the team will say, we need to take the baton approach here. We're not going to be able to accomplish what we want to unless we take the baton approach. In other words, that leadership team is saying, we're very comfortable with scripted individual tasks here and a very directive model. And, my view, we don't in the book make any value statement about any of these archetypes. We don't say this one's good and this one is bad. I think there are absolutely examples where general and soldiers is the right model. I think an enterprise in crisis needs a highly directive model. And the other way I like to illustrate that point, and it's a ridiculous example, but just to overstate the case, what do we want to have happen if the fire alarm goes off right now? Do we want to start some collaboration on, let's have a focus group over here, maybe you guys work on the whiteboard on should we use this door or this door, or let's have another group, get some social media going here, let's collaborate. No! We want the fire marshal responsible for this floor to get us out of this building as quickly and as directive as possible. And I think an enterprise in crisis needs a highly directive model. There was another question over here.
In our class this semester, we read and discussed one, when we were discussing it, came down to this division, I guess, definitions of leaders and managers. What's the difference? Is there a difference between us? I was wondering if you could maybe describe what you think a leader is versus a manager.
I think it's a debate that's been around for a long period of time, and Peter Drucker, who I earlier referred to, he doesn't like the word leader. He thinks the only word that really matters is manager. And what I think you actually need are both. I think of myself very much as a leader and someone who has that bias, that approach, that leadership style, or that what that individual needs is a really strong manager with them. Because the enterprise can't be successful without commercial success. I think I was a good CEO of Deloitte. One of the smartest things I did is I appointed Barry Salzberg as my managing partner. If you have a tough New York, Brooklyn boy managing your business, let me tell you, baby, you're going to deliver against that plan. And it gives someone like me who wants to lead with the power of my ideas and wants to try to become a magnet to try to cause and pull the organization in some directions, it empowers you and able to do that. The reality of it is, and especially in a professional services firm, make your plan, you're unbeatable. Miss your plan, you're unelectable. Now, what does it take to actually achieve your plan? You've got to be a really good manager. But I also think that a leader is able to really try to pull together, and perhaps a leader can help move the percentage of that workforce that is really truly passionate and engaged. And you can actually try to lead with your heart. But those words are much closer together than they are apart. And I don't think you can really truly be successful without both of them. because in order to have a long-term, so a visionary leader who really thinks long-term, the only way that leader is going to have the privilege of a long-term is if they have a short-term. The only way you're going to have a short-term is if you actually deliver on your plan. Trust me, in professional services, it isn't more complicated than you take your profits at the end, you divide your profits by the number of units that are held by the partners, you multiply the number of units each partner holds by that value per unit, and that's what you distribute to them. What do you think partners do if, when you divide that profit at the end by the number of units, you're way under plan? The impeachment hearings begin immediately, and you're gone. So in order to have a long term, you have to have a short term. And so I don't spend a lot of time in that debate. I think you need both effective managers and you need leaders. We probably have time for one more question if anybody has one question. The final question right here.
So you talked about how people can use compassion or compassion to be affected by leadership. My question is, how can someone who is passionate help those who are unengaged or not passionate?
I just think that success has an ability to be momentum creating. And what really happens is, I know that some of you will react emotionally negative to the example that I'm going to say, but I'm going to do it anyway without apology. I think sometimes you need the coalition of the willing. And if I had the other slide, I'm sorry I don't have the other slide in my deck, but if I had my Australian deck with 2009, 2010, 2011, what you would see is these bars, these green bars, just get longer and longer and longer. And in 2011, it's like 80% of the partners are committed to take action to really make things happen. I had a fascinating discussion. I get debates sometimes, debates the wrong term. I have interesting discussions with leaders in the public sector. And what they sometimes say to me, because you can look at leadership and you can start to think, well, this really matters in the private sector. I was meeting with the cabinet secretary in the province of Ontario, and she was a business executive who had been a CEO, and now she was the cabinet secretary. So all of the ministries report to her. And she said to me, she said, Jim, if I had to wait until I had everybody committed to actually take action in Ontario, we'd get nothing done. If you give everyone the right of veto by simply allowing themselves to be either just supportive or undecided, and if you think you can't act until you've got consensus, you're giving everybody in the organization a veto. And what happens when the train pulls out and you've got 45% on the train and everybody sort of figures out, I didn't support Jim, or I didn't really, this idea of a Deloitte client promise, I'm not crazy about Jim's language. This notion of making a promise to clients in a regulated environment, there's just some stuff I don't like about that language. But when they see the train heading down and they see a whole bunch of partners lining up with Jim, and now they're on the train, and then they see us outperforming our competitors, what happens is they start to become committed, and they start to become more passionate, and they start to believe, and you start to create some momentum. You're always going to have those skeptics. You know, I spent 10 years in St. Louis. You know, Missouri, the Missouri crowd prides themselves as being from the show me state of Missouri. There's just people who are show me. You know, show me this is going to work, Jim. After you show me this works, then maybe I'm going to be committed to it. But I think you build that passionate crowd just with momentum that you can create in the organization. And the other thing you have to do is reward those who really are truly making a difference. And then people quite quickly see, wow, that turned out pretty nicely for them. Wow, that team really got recognized. Wow, that team got rewarded. I'm going to behave that way. I can see that team is more passionate about the things they're doing. And that's how you create the momentum. But I think you win it. You win the war sort of one foxhole at a time in many, many ways. But you cannot wait. You cannot think the leader's job is all about consensus. And until I have consensus, I can't go. And you will see those green bars get longer. Privilege for me to be here. Thank you very much. I hope this was useful to you.